Welcome back to our channel, True Crime Enthusiasts. I'm John Garfield. In 2025, the United States carried out 47 executions, the highest tally in 16 years, nearly doubling the 25 from 2024. States like Florida and Texas led the charge, turning warrants into final acts amid a push to clear backlogs. But numbers have plummeted overall in recent decades, dragged down by moratoriums in places like California and Pennsylvania, endless appeals, and botched procedures that sparked outrage. Critics slam it as justice denied, victims' families left waiting while killers linger. Why the holdups? Innocence projects uncovering flaws, governors granting stays, or a nation rethinking vengeance. Yet 2026 presses on with over 40 scheduled. Texas's Charles Thompson set for January 28, Florida's Ronald Heath in February, Tennessee's Krista Pike facing lethal injection as the state's sole female death row inmate. Their sentences stem from brutal killings that shattered lives, but the full horrors? We'll uncover those edges. Does delay equal mercy or evade accountability? Who truly pays? Don't forget to like and share this video with others, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for upcoming episodes. Now, let's start to the main points of the video today. Charles Victor Thompson.
Born on June 13, 1970 in Harris County, Texas, Charles Victor Thompson entered the world as an unremarkable white boy with blue eyes and brown hair, eventually growing to a height of about 6 feet. From the outside, his early years seemed ordinary, growing up in the humid suburbs of Houston, surrounded by the sprawling energy of the Lone Star State. But dig a little deeper, and the cracks start to show. By the time he was a teenager, Thompson had dropped out of school after 10th grade, trading classrooms for the grind of blue-collar jobs. He bounced around as an air conditioning installer, an electronics technician, even a pest exterminator, roles that kept him moving, anonymous in the shadows of everyday life. No criminal record, no red flags waving in the wind. Yet, inside, he was a ticking time bomb, simmering with unspoken tensions that would one day erupt in unimaginable horror. Psychologically, Thompson's early life hinted at deeper issues, ones that experts would later dissect in courtrooms. Diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder, he exhibited a lack of emotional stability from a young age, relationships that flared hot and burned out fast, marked by possessiveness and volatility. Imagine a man who could charm his way through a conversation, only to harbor resentments that festered like hidden wounds. This wasn't just youthful rebellion, it was a blueprint for toxic bonds, where love twisted into control. In the quiet moments, he lurked like a silent ghost, observing the world with a detached calm that masked the storm brewing within. Court records from his 1999 trial painted him as someone who thrived in structured environments later in life, with one psychologist noting, "Thompson is a sober individual who benefits from the regimented routine of incarceration. It's chilling to think how this facade of normalcy hid a potential for violence, a shadow self waiting for the right trigger to unleash chaos." As the years rolled on into his 20s, Thompson's life remained a patchwork of odd jobs and fleeting connections, but the undercurrents of instability grew stronger. He navigated the world with a quiet intensity, blending into the background of Houston's bustling streets, fixing AC units in sweltering summers, zapping bugs in forgotten corners. No arrests, no outbursts that made headlines. But those who knew him might have sensed the unease, the way his blue eyes could turn cold in an instant. It was as if he was always one slight away from snapping, a predator disguised as prey, and then a shattered romance would plunge him into the abyss. But was jealousy the sole culprit, or was there something darker at play, a psychological fracture that had been widening for decades? It was the evening of April 29, 1998, in a modest apartment nestled on the north side of Harris County, Texas, a place that should have been a sanctuary, but instead became the stage for brewing catastrophe. Charles Victor Thompson, his blood boiling with unchecked jealousy, showed up uninvited to confront his ex-girlfriend, Denise Hayslip, who was 39 years old and trying to move on with her life. There, too, was her new boyfriend, Darren Keith Kane, just 30, unwittingly caught in the crosshairs of Thompson's festering resentment. The argument started small, perhaps over old grievances or lingering possessions, but it spiraled fast into a shouting match that echoed through the thin walls. Voices clashed like thunder, accusations flying back and forth in the sticky, humid air of a Texas spring night. Neighbors, disturbed by the commotion, called the cops, and soon blue lights flashed outside the window. Officers arrived, assessed the volatile situation, and decided to intervene before things turned physical. They pulled Thompson aside, sternly warning him to cool off and stay away, then escorted him out of the apartment and into the darkness. As the patrol car pulled away, the immediate threat seemed averted. But Thompson didn't disappear into the night as expected. No, he hovered on the edges of the property, a shadowy figure lurking in the dim glow of streetlights, his mind a whirlwind of dark impulses. That very night, under the cover of obscurity, he slunk back toward the apartment like a black specter, drawn inexorably by the pull of obsession and rage. Dawn broke on April 30, 1998, but peace shattered with it. Thompson, now armed with a handgun that felt cold and heavy in his grip, approached the door with purposeful strides. In a burst of fury, he kicked it open with a deafening crack, the wood splintering like brittle bones under his boot. The intrusion was sudden, violent. Darren Keith Kane, still groggy from sleep or perhaps startled awake, had no time to react. Thompson fired point blank, the shots ringing out in rapid succession, bullets tearing through Kane's flesh and dropping him instantly to the floor. Blood sprayed across the walls in gruesome arcs, pooling beneath his lifeless body as his eyes glazed over in eternal shock. Denise Hayslip, witnessing the horror unfold in her own home, screamed, a piercing wail that cut through the morning quiet like a knife. She tried to flee or fight back, but Thompson turned on her next, unleashing more rounds that ripped into her torso and limbs. The metallic scent of gunpowder mixed with the coppery tang of fresh blood, filling the air as Hayslip collapsed, clutching her wounds while crimson soaked her nightclothes and seeped into the carpet. Her cries for help grew weaker, gurgling with pain as shock set in, her body trembling from the trauma. Panicked neighbors, jolted by the gunfire, hammered on their phones for emergency services, their voices frantic over the line. Paramedics rushed in minutes later, stepping into a scene straight from a slasher film. Kane's corpse sprawled awkwardly, limbs askew in death's unnatural pose, and Hayslip barely clinging to life, her pale face contorted in agony amid the chaos of overturned furniture and bullet casings. The wounds were catastrophic, multiple entry points that damaged vital organs, causing internal bleeding that no field dressing could staunch. In a desperate bid to save her, she was airlifted by medical helicopter to Memorial Hermann Hospital, the chopper's blades thumping urgently overhead as IV lines were inserted and monitors beeped erratically. But the damage proved insidious. Over the agonizing week that followed, Hayslip faded in the sterile hospital room, machines sustaining her fragile existence while infections raged and organs failed one by one. The bullet wounds lingered like a vengeful curse from a jilted lover, slowly siphoning her strength until she drew her last breath on May 7, 1998, leaving behind a void of grief for her family. This carnage wasn't some tragic mishap or a fleeting loss of control. It was the volcanic eruption of an antisocial personality disorder, where simmering jealousy twisted into lethal savagery. Psychologists poring over Thompson's profile would later highlight how his emotional instability, rooted in years of detachment, amplified rejection into a weapon. Here we see the unchecked wrath of someone who views relationships as battlegrounds. Analysts might explain, noting how his disorder eroded any semblance of empathy, replacing it with a cold calculus of possession and payback. In that moment of violence, jealousy didn't just simmer, it boiled over into premeditated murder, transforming a man who once fixed air conditioners into a harbinger of death. Chillingly, Thompson's own account, shared in the 2018 Netflix documentary, I Am a Killer, reveals a haunting detachment. I don't remember anything about it. Was this selective amnesia a defense mechanism, a way to distance himself from the horror he unleashed? Or did the adrenaline-fueled blackout truly erase the screams, the blood, the final gasps? Either interpretation underscores the psychological abyss within him, a void where remorse should reside, but instead harbors only self-preservation. Arrested in the aftermath, with evidence as damning as the blood on his hands, Thompson was hauled into custody, the weight of handcuffs a prelude to the chains of justice. But as he sat in that interrogation room, staring blankly at the walls, the story was far from over. The wheels of the legal system began to turn, promising retribution for the shattered lives left in his wake. Yet, in the shadowy corridors of Texas courts, delays and twists loomed like unseen threats. Would accountability come swiftly for the families aching for closure, or would the saga drag on, turning their pain into an endless nightmare? By the spring of 1999, the wheels of justice had ground into motion in a Houston courtroom, where Charles Victor Thompson sat shackled before a jury tasked with deciding his fate. The evidence was overwhelming: eyewitness accounts, ballistic reports tying the gun to the grisly scene, and the haunting testimonies from neighbors who still woke up sweating from the echoes of those fatal shots. Prosecutors painted Thompson as a cold-blooded killer, a man whose jealousy had morphed into a deadly storm that claimed 2 lives in a fit of rage. The jury, a mix of ordinary Texans from all walks of life, stared at him with undisguised revulsion, eyes narrowing as if gazing upon a monster in human skin, his blue-eyed gaze meeting theirs with an unnerving calm. Deliberations didn't drag on. The verdict came swiftly in April, convicting him of capital murder for the slayings of Denise Hayslip and Darren Keith Kane. Then came the penalty phase, where the state pushed for the ultimate punishment, arguing that Thompson's lack of remorse and history of volatility made him a perpetual threat. The bickering among jurors was minimal. They handed down a death sentence, sealing his destiny with the stroke of a pen. As the gavel fell, the courtroom air thickened with a sense of finality, the families of the victims exhaling in quiet relief, while Thompson remained stoic, his expression betraying nothing but a faint, inscrutable twitch at the corner of his mouth. But in the twisted corridors of the American legal system, nothing is ever truly final, especially not when procedural missteps lurk in the shadows, ready to unravel even the tightest knots of justice. It didn't take long for cracks to appear in that seemingly ironclad conviction. In the months following the trial, Thompson's defense team pored over transcripts and evidence logs, spotting a glaring violation that would upend everything. During the proceedings, prosecutors had introduced an audio tape of a jailhouse phone call, a damning snippet where Thompson allegedly discussed matters that bolstered their case for his sociopathic tendencies. But here's the kicker: they hadn't notified his attorneys in advance, robbing the defense of the chance to prepare or challenge its admissibility. This wasn't just a minor oversight. It struck at the heart of Thompson's Sixth Amendment rights, the sacred guarantee of counsel in criminal proceedings. By 2001, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals had reviewed the case on direct appeal and agreed the tape's introduction was a reversible error, tainting the entire trial. The death sentence was vacated, and the conviction overturned, sending shockwaves through the Harris County justice system. Thompson, confined to death row in the meantime, must have allowed himself a private smirk behind those cold prison walls. He knew the intricacies of the law better than most inmates, having spent hours studying legal texts in his cell. The U.S. system, with its layers of appeals and safeguards against wrongful convictions, was riddled with loopholes, opportunities for the cunning to exploit. For Thompson, this wasn't defeat. It was a reprieve, a chance to breathe while the state scrambled to rebuild its case. Psychologically, it fed into his antisocial profile, a man who thrived on manipulation, viewing the courtroom not as an arena of judgment, but as a chessboard where he could outmaneuver his opponents. The overturn wasn't just a legal win, it was a psychological boost, reinforcing his belief that he could game the system, that his intellect could delay the inevitable. Yet, even as the first trial crumbled, Thompson's appeals would stretch on for years, layering new arguments atop the old. In one particularly bold challenge during a 2019 federal appeal, his lawyers zeroed in on the causation of Hayslip's death, questioning whether the gunshot wounds were truly fatal or if medical intervention had played a deadly role. The evidence is legally insufficient to support his conviction. They argued, pointing to reports of a misplaced breathing tube during her hospital treatment that may have contributed to her demise. From the bench, judges scrutinized this claim, with one probing in open court, as the proof inadequate because Hayslip's death stemmed from medical error rather than the bullets themselves. It was a technical gambit, one that sought to sever the direct link between Thompson's actions and the tragic outcome, exploiting the nuances of criminal causation law. While this appeal ultimately failed to sway the Fifth Circuit, it highlighted the relentless nature of death penalty litigation, decades of filings, hearings, and denials that turned justice into a marathon. For the victims' families, it was excruciating, a perpetual wound reopened with every court date. Thompson, meanwhile, adapted to life on the row, his days regimented by prison routines that, as one psychologist testified back in 1999, he actually benefited from, finding a perverse stability in the isolation. But beneath that facade, the seeds of defiance grew. The state geared up for a retrial in 2005, determined to secure another death sentence. Thompson sat through the proceedings once more, the jury delivering the expected verdict on October 28, condemning him to die by lethal injection. Relief washed over the courtroom, but the air hummed with unspoken tension. Unbeknownst to anyone, an audacious escape plan was already coalescing in Thompson's mind, a scheme so brazen it would make headlines and expose the vulnerabilities of even the most secure facilities. He was examined, sentenced, and transferred, but as guards locked his cell door that night, the countdown to chaos had begun. Would this second conviction stick, or was Thompson plotting his most daring move yet? On October 28, 2005, the gavel fell for the second time in a Harris County courtroom, echoing like a death knell through the tense air. Charles Victor Thompson, now 35 and hardened by years on death row, stared impassively as the jury delivered their verdict guilty of capital murder, sentenced to die by lethal injection. The retrial had been a grueling replay of the horrors from 1998, with prosecutors dredging up every bloody detail: the splintered door, the lifeless bodies, the air thick with gun smoke. Family members of Hayslip and Kane wept quietly in the gallery, their faces etched with a mix of relief and exhaustion after waiting so long for this moment. Thompson, clad in an orange jumpsuit, offered no outburst, no plea for mercy. His blue eyes flicked across the room with that same detached calm that had unnerved everyone from the start. Guards led him away in chains, transferring him back to the Harris County Jail in downtown Houston, a fortress of concrete and steel meant to hold the most dangerous offenders. But as the cell door clanged shut that night, no one could have predicted the audacious plot already unfolding in his mind. Just days later, on November 3, Thompson vanished from custody like a ghost slipping through cracks in the system. He had orchestrated it with chilling precision, forging a fake ID badge mimicking one from the Texas Attorney General's office, complete with a laminated photo and official-looking seal. Posing as a state investigator there to question him about an unrelated case, he convinced a deputy to escort him to an interview room without restraints. Once alone, he shed his inmate garb for smuggled civilian clothes, jeans, a button-down shirt, sneakers stashed in advance through some unseen accomplice. Then, with a casual nod and a fabricated story, he strolled right out the front door into the bustling Houston streets, heart pounding but steps steady, blending into the crowd as alarms belatedly wailed behind him. The escape sent shockwaves rippling across Texas and beyond, a real-life thriller unfolding in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, which had devastated the Gulf Coast just months earlier. Thompson, now a fugitive with a 10,000 reward on his head, hit the road eastward, hitchhiking and busying his way toward Louisiana under the radar. He exploited the chaos of the storm's refugees, weaving tales of lost homes and flooded lives to elicit sympathy from strangers. In Baton Rouge and beyond, he posed as a Katrina survivor, his disheveled appearance, a rumpled shirt, unshaven face, eyes wild with feigned desperation, earning him handouts of food, clothes, and cash from good Samaritans at shelters and roadside stops. But the freedom was fleeting, laced with paranoia. Every siren in the distance twisted his gut. Every glance from a passerby felt like accusation. He wandered like a zombie through rain-slicked streets, his mind a fog of adrenaline and alcohol, ducking into dive bars to numb the edge with cheap whiskey. By the time he reached Shreveport, Louisiana, on November 6, the toll showed staggering outside a liquor store, bottle in hand, his speech slurred as he fumbled with a payphone to call a friend for more money. It was that call, traced by authorities, that sealed his recapture. Local cops, tipped off by the FBI's manhunt, swooped in as he hung up, tackling him to the pavement amid the glow of neon signs. Thompson didn't resist much. Perhaps the booze had dulled his fight, or maybe he knew the game was up. Handcuffed and hauled back to Texas, he faced additional charges for the escape, but his smirk in the mugshot hinted at a twisted satisfaction. 4 days of liberty, snatched from the jaws of death row, had been an intoxicating taste of the outside world. Psychologically, this breakout wasn't the act of a desperate fool. It revealed the terrifying intellect of a disordered mind, one that thrived on cunning and control. Thompson's antisocial personality shone through in the meticulous planning, smuggling clothes, crafting the ID, timing the ruse during a shift change when security might lax. It wasn't random luck, it was a calculated strike against the system that had caged him, proving his belief that he could outsmart anyone. Experts later dissected it as a hallmark of his pathology, a narcissist who viewed rules as challenges to bend, empathy as a weakness to exploit. In Roger Rodriguez's 2008 biography, The Grass Beneath His Feet, the Charles Victor Thompson story, Thompson reflected on those frantic days with a haunting nonchalance. I was free for only 4 days, but those were 4 days worth it. The words drip with defiance, underscoring how even a brief escape fed his ego, turning humiliation into triumph in his warped perspective. Recaptured and returned to the unforgiving grip of Polunsky Unit's death row, Thompson didn't break. Instead, he doubled down on the fight. But being caught was just a setback in a longer war. The appeals would drag on for decades, layer upon layer of legal maneuvers challenging everything from evidence admissibility to the very cause of Hayslip's death. As years turned to dust, families waited in agony, while Thompson adapted to his cell like a spider in its web. Now, with execution looming on January 28, 2026, the first of the year, tensions build anew. Will the needle finally fall, or does another twist await in this endless nightmare? In the years following his dramatic recapture, Charles Victor Thompson's story didn't fade into the obscurity of prison walls. Instead, it catapulted him into the spotlight of true crime notoriety, transforming a condemned man into an unlikely media figure. By 2008, author Roger Rodriguez had chronicled his audacious escape in the book, The Grass Beneath His Feet, painting Thompson as a cunning anti-hero who outwitted the system, if only briefly. The tale resonated with audiences hungry for prison break dramas, and soon Hollywood came calling, or at least documentary crews did. In 2012, Thompson appeared in an episode of Extreme Prison Breaks titled Runaway Chuck, where grainy reenactments captured the tension of his 4-day sprint to freedom, complete with shadowy figures and heart-pounding chases. He stared into the camera with that same unflinching gaze, recounting details that blurred the line between regret and relish. Then, in 2018, Netflix's I Am a Killer devoted an entire episode to him in its first season, delving into the psyche of a man who claimed selective amnesia about the murders, but remembered every step of his escape with vivid clarity. From the isolation of death row, Thompson evolved into a star of sorts. His face splashed across screens and pages, drawing viewers into the macabre allure of his crimes. He even took to writing a blog on the platform Between the Bars, a non-profit site for inmates, to share their thoughts with the outside world. In raw, unfiltered posts, he mused about life behind bars, philosophy, and redemption, entries that humanized him for some fans while infuriating victims' advocates. It was as if the bars couldn't contain his narrative. He wielded words like weapons, keeping his story alive in the public eye, a ghostly presence haunting true crime forums and podcasts long after the headlines cooled. But fame couldn't shield him from the inexorable grind of the legal system, and as the 2010s waned, Thompson's appeals began to falter one by one. Between 2019 and 2021, his team exhausted every avenue, challenging the causation of Hayslip's death by arguing medical errors, not his bullets, were the true culprit, questioning jury instructions, even alleging ineffective counsel. Federal courts, including the Fifth Circuit, reviewed the filings with meticulous scrutiny, but each denial landed like a hammer blow, chipping away at his dwindling options. By 2021, he had run out of standard appeals, left only with long-shot clemency pleas or gubernatorial intervention, paths rarely trodden successfully in Texas, where the death penalty machine churns with grim efficiency. This protracted battle illuminated the double-edged sword of America's justice system. Its painstaking safeguards against wrongful execution offer layers of review that can stretch for decades, a testament to due process in a nation that prides itself on fairness. Yet, for the families of Hayslip and Kane, it was torture, a 28-year odyssey of court dates, dashed hopes, and reopened wounds. How much longer must we wait for closure? One relative might have whispered in the quiet aftermath of yet another ruling, their lives suspended in the limbo of legal technicalities, while Thompson adapted to his cell like it was home. The momentum shifted decisively in the mid-2020s as the noose of finality tightened. On October 29, 2024, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit upheld his conviction in a terse opinion, rejecting his latest habeas corpus petition and paving the way for the endgame. Less than a year later, on September 11, 2025, Judge Lori Chambers Gray of the 262nd District Court in Houston signed the execution warrant, setting the date for January 28, 2026, the first lethal injection scheduled in the new year. The hearing was a somber affair, conducted partly via Zoom due to lingering pandemic protocols, with Thompson appearing remotely from his cell. Reports from the courtroom described the Kane family in attendance, their eyes red-rimmed from years of suppressed grief, as prosecutors emphasized the need for swift justice after nearly 3 decades of delays. Thompson's lawyer pleaded for more time to pursue clemency, but the judge denied it, her ruling a cold echo in the virtual space. As of late 2025, Thompson languishes in solitary confinement at the Polunsky Unit in Livingston, Texas, a maximum security hellhole known as one of the most oppressive death rows in the nation. Here, in a 60-square-foot cell with a steel door and a narrow window slit, he awaits the lethal cocktail of drugs that will stop his heart. The build-up is eerie. Guards monitor him around the clock in the Death Watch section, where the condemned are stripped of privileges, their every move catalogued in logs. Thompson, now 55 and graying, has reportedly maintained his composure. But the psychological toll manifests in subtle ways, perhaps in the way he followed that September hearing over Zoom, his face a blank mask on the screen, uttering not a single word as his fate was sealed. It's like watching a soul hover on the brink of oblivion, a spectral figure resigned yet defiant, his silence amplifying the horror of impending doom. Whispers from fellow inmates paint him as introspective, poring over books or scribbling notes, but the air in Polunsky reeks of finality, a place where time crawls toward the execution chamber in Huntsville, just miles away. With only a little over a month left until January 28, 2026, the clock ticks relentlessly. Clemency petitions are pending before Governor Greg Abbott, but history suggests slim odds. Texas hasn't granted mercy in a death case since 2007. Will a last-minute stay intervene, sparked by new evidence or public outcry? Or is this truly the end for the man who once slipped death's grasp? The families hold their breath, the world watches, and Thompson waits in his concrete tomb, the ultimate cliffhanger unfolding in real time.
Wade Stephen Wilson. To dive into the details of how the events unfolded, I've gathered information from court records, police reports, and witness statements. There are plenty of notable points along the way. Stay steady. Some actions here are hard to square with what one person could do. On the night of October 6, 2019, Wade Stephen Wilson stepped into a local bar in Cape Coral, Florida. He had just fought with his girlfriend. The argument left him restless. Inside the dimly lit spot, he spotted Christine Melton, a 35-year-old woman out with friends. They talked. Drinks flowed. Before long, Wilson joined Melton and her group as they headed back to her house. The night blurred into something casual, unremarkable at first. But what sparked that chance meeting? Was it just bad luck or something darker pulling the strings? Morning broke on October 7, 2019. In Melton's bedroom, things turned deadly. After they had sex, Wilson wrapped his hands around her neck. He squeezed until she stopped moving. Christine Melton lay lifeless on the bed. Wilson didn't pause. He grabbed her car keys from the nightstand and slipped out the door. The engine roared to life as he drove off in her stolen vehicle, leaving her body behind. Why the sudden shift from intimacy to violence? Did the drugs in his system fuel it, or was this rage always simmering just below the surface? That same day, October 7, 2019, Wilson cruised the streets of Cape Coral. He noticed Diane Ruiz, 43, walking along the roadside. She was on her way to work, a single mother with a routine life. Wilson pulled over. He leaned out the window and asked for directions, his voice steady, disarming. Ruiz got in the car to help. Moments later, his hands were on her throat. He strangled her until her body went limp. The attack was swift, opportunistic. But what made Ruiz a target? A random pedestrian, or did Wilson see vulnerability in her solitary walk? Wilson didn't stop there. With Ruiz dead in the passenger seat, he drove to a secluded spot. He dragged her body out and dumped it in the grass. Then he got back in the car. He reversed, accelerated, and ran over her. Again and again. The tires crushed bone and flesh, ensuring no chance of survival. He left her mangled remains in an open field, exposed to the elements. The act was methodical, almost ritualistic. How many times did he back up and drive forward? What compelled him to desecrate the body like that, turning murder into something even more grotesque? The immediate aftermath unfolded quickly. Still on October 7, 2019, Wilson picked up his phone. He dialed his birth father, Stephen Testaseca. In a calm, detached voice, he confessed. "I killed 2 women today," he said, recounting the details without a hint of regret. The call lasted minutes, but it set everything in motion. Testaseca, stunned, contacted the police. Wilson's words hung in the air, cold, factual. Why call his father of all people? Was it a twisted boast, or the first crack in his facade, knowing the net was closing in? As the sun set on that fateful day, Cape Coral, a quiet coastal town, remained oblivious to the horror. Melton's friends would soon wonder why she didn't answer calls. Ruiz's workplace would notice her absence. The stolen car sat parked somewhere, key still in the ignition. Wilson's spree had lasted less than 24 hours, but it shattered lives forever. Questions linger. What if Melton had stayed home that night? Could Ruiz have kept walking, ignoring the stranger's request? These moments, frozen in time, reveal the fragility of everyday choices. Yet this is only the beginning of the nightmare. What shaped the man behind these acts, his troubled past, the addictions, the prior brushes with the law? And how did authorities piece it together, leading to a trial riddled with controversy? The shadows of his background, the chase for justice, and the lingering mysteries await in the chapters ahead. For a clearer view of the case and the man behind it, let's break down Wade Wilson's background and the events that shaped him. You might spot red flags that got overlooked time and again. So, on May 20, 1994, Wade Stephen Wilson entered the world. He came into a family that adopted him early on. His adoptive parents provided a stable home in Florida. They showed him care. But by his teenage years, things shifted. Mental health issues surfaced. Drug use took hold. Wilson started down a path that led away from that loving environment. His birth father, Stephen Testaseca, later described him plainly. "He's never shown remorse," Testaseca said. "No apology, no regret, just facts laid bare." What pushed a boy from a supportive home into that void? Did the adoption leave unseen scars, or was it something wired deeper? The troubles built slowly at first. In November 2013, Wilson faced his first major conviction. Burglary and grand theft. He broke into places. He took what wasn't his. The court sentenced him. He served time, but it didn't stop there. 2 years later, in 2015, authorities arrested him again. Charges included sexual battery and kidnapping. He held someone against their will. He crossed lines. Yet the case fell apart. He walked free. No conviction stuck. Questions hung in the air. How did he evade that one? Was evidence thin, or did luck play a hand in his release? On October 17, 2017, another mark hit his record, firearm theft. Wilson stole a gun. The court convicted him. He paid the price, but the pattern held. Weapons entered the mix now. Danger edged closer. Then, on February 19, 2019, accusations piled up once more. He stole a laptop and phone from an ex-girlfriend. Items vanished from her space. Later claims surfaced, kidnapping and rape. But a no-contact order blocked the probe. Investigators stopped short. No deeper dig. Why let that slide? Did the order shield him, or did the system fail to push through? Just months before the murders, on July 1, 2019, Wilson landed in custody again. Battery. He struck someone. Physical harm. The arrest came and went. He moved on. But behind these entries lay a deeper rot. Methamphetamine gripped him. The drug fueled highs and crashes. Mental disorders compounded it. Doctors noted instability. His face bore the marks. Tattoos covered it. A swastika stood out. It tied him to extremist views. Hate symbols etched in skin. In Cape Coral, Florida, a quiet coastal spot, this all brewed under the surface. The town held beaches and suburbs. Families walked streets without fear. Wilson's presence shattered that illusion. The community reeled when the killings hit. How did a place so calm harbor such a storm? What signs did neighbors miss every day? The victims fit no pattern beyond chance. Christine Melton, 35, lived alone. She worked, socialized. On that October night in 2019, she sat at a bar. Wilson appeared. Conversation started. She invited him back with friends. A casual encounter. No red flags raised. Diane Ruiz, 43, raised kids on her own. She walked to her job each day, routine steps along the road. Wilson drove by in Melton's stolen car. He asked for directions. She climbed in to help, trust given freely. Both women crossed his path at the wrong moment, Melton through a night out, Ruiz through a helpful gesture. Their lives ended abruptly. Why these two? Random picks, or did Wilson spot weakness in their solitude? Zoom out, and the case mirrored bigger shadows across America. Violent crimes tied to drugs, mental breakdowns unchecked. Meth ravaged communities. Instability bred chaos. Wilson's story drew eyes nationwide. The media dubbed him the handsome devil. His looks, despite the tattoos, pulled focus. Fans emerged online. Women sent letters. They called it hybridophilia, attraction to killers. Social media buzzed with it. Posts glorified his image. The case highlighted a dark underbelly. Fame twisted around horror. Public fascination grew. But at its core, it exposed failures. Systems that let prior crimes slide, addictions untreated, extremism ignored. In Florida's sunny facade, these elements collided. The shock rippled out. Communities questioned safety. Families mourned. What fed this cycle? Could intervention have halted the slide years earlier? This background sets the stage for the unraveling. A man shaped by adoption, drugs, and unchecked acts. Victims caught in the crossfire. Society's cracks exposed. But the story presses on. How did authorities close in? What unfolded in the courtroom with debates over mind and motive? The investigations, the trials, the sentences, and the lingering doubts lie ahead, pulling back more layers on the man they called the Deadpool Killer. In this section, let's go back over the events that turned this into one of the most debated cases around. The details here draw from trial transcripts, legal filings, and investigative notes. On October 8, 2019, police took Wade Stephen Wilson into custody. His birth father, Stephen Testaseca, had called them. Wilson had phoned him the day before. He laid out the killings in flat tones. No emotion. The father passed it on. Detectives questioned Wilson at the station. He sat there, face marked with tattoos. He told them he would do it again if he got the chance. No regret in his voice. The words hung in the room. Officers noted it down. What made him say that right away? Did he think it would scare them, or was it just the truth spilling out? 2 days later, on October 10, 2019, search teams found Diane Ruiz's body. It lay in the field where Wilson said it would be. He had pointed it out during his talk with police. The remains showed the damage. Tire tracks over bones, grass flattened. Medical examiners confirmed strangulation. The scene matched his account. Cape Coral streets stayed quiet, but word spread. Families locked doors. Why lead them straight to the body? Was it a game, or did he want the chase over? The case moved fast. On November 19, 2019, a grand jury indicted him. 2 counts of first-degree murder. Premeditated. They added charges for the car theft, the battery on Ruiz. Wilson stayed in jail. No bail. Lawyers shuffled papers, the room filled with nods, evidence stacked up, phone records, witness statements from the bar. What holes might the defense poke? Could they claim the confession came under pressure? By December 3, 2019, prosecutors made their move. They announced plans for the death penalty. The office issued a statement. Wilson's acts called for it, they said. Brutal. No mercy shown. The news hit local channels. Reporters stood outside the courthouse. Cameras clicked. Wilson heard it from his cell. No reaction reported. Why go for death so early? Did they see no path to redemption in his file? Time passed in lockup. On September 30, 2020, Wilson tried to break out. Guards caught him. Details stayed thin. A hole in the fence maybe. Tools smuggled in. It added charges. Escape attempt. The jail tightened rules. His case dragged on. COVID slowed courts. Hearings pushed back. What drove the escape? Fear of the needle, or just another thrill? Years later, the trial started. On June 10, 2024, the courtroom filled. Witnesses took the stand. Melton's friends described the bar night, the drive home. Ruiz's family spoke of her walk to work. Experts detailed the strangulations. Photos shown. Jury looked away sometimes. Wilson sat still. Tattoos on display. Defense cross-examined. Gaps in timelines. Drug haze. But the state pushed hard. How did the witnesses hold up? Could their memories shift the scales? 2 days in, on June 12, 2024, the jury returned, guilty on all counts. 2 first-degree murders, grand theft auto, battery, burglary. The foreman read it out. Wilson showed no change. Tufts clicked as guards let him out. Families wept in the seats. The phase shifted to penalty. What swayed the jury so quick? Evidence too clear, or his face sealing it? On June 25, 2024, they recommended death. 9-3 for Melton, 10-2 for Ruiz. Votes split. Florida's new law from 2023 allowed it. No full agreement needed, just 8 yeses. Critics called it unfair, less democratic, more room for mistakes. Petitions circulated. Groups argued it broke justice basics. Wilson's team pointed to it. Appeal grounds. But the judge noted the votes. What if the old rule stood? Would those holdouts save him? Debates raged outside. Wilson's mental history came up. Disorders from youth, meth addiction. Court dismissed it as mitigation, no reduction. Talk spread of missed rehab chances. Hundreds of letters poured in. Women wrote for leniency. They noted his cleaned-up look in jail. Treatment worked, they said. But the state ignored. Why brush off the psych file? Did it threaten the narrative of pure evil? His statements clashed too. Wilson claimed a setup. Underground traffickers framed him. He confessed to shield family, he said. Doubts on hidden evidence. His first lawyer botched it. He called them terrible. Key proofs left out. Investigators denied it. No proof surfaced. What if those claims held water? A bigger web? Or just deflection? Bias crept in. Prosecutors highlighted his looks. The swastika tattoo. It swayed the jury, critics said. Motive debates flared. Drugs or intent. His prison ties to the unforgiven gang added fuel. Violations in jail. Smuggling. Fights. It painted Florida's system dark. Overcrowded. Flawed. Questions piled on fairness. Did the ink doom him more than the axe? The gavel fell, but echoes lingered. This phase closed one door. Yet death row waited. The sentence. The cell life. Appeals stretching years. Fan letters. A documentary in 2026 stirring it all up again. These twists and unseen threads pull the story forward, revealing more about the man, the system, and the shadows that refuse to fade. On August 27, 2024, Wade Stephen Wilson stood in the Lee County courtroom. Judge Nicholas Thompson looked him over. The murders of Christine Melton and Diane Ruiz demanded death, the judge said. The brutality outweighed any claims of mental fog or drug haze. No room for leniency. Wilson stared ahead, face still marked with those tattoos. Guards let him out. 3 days later, on August 30th, 2024, he entered death row at Florida State Prison. The cell door clanged shut. Strict routine set in. 23 hours locked down, 1 hour out. Meals slid through a slot, no windows to the outside world. What crossed his mind in those first silent hours? Did the weight of the sentence finally crack that cold exterior? Life on the road dragged on. Wilson adapted to the grind. Reports came in of rule breaks. He smuggled drugs, guards said. Ties to the Unforgiven gang surfaced. Whispers of fights and deals in the yard. Yet fan mail piled up. Women sent letters drawn to his handsome devil look. They wrote of love, forgiveness. Wilson read them in his cell, maybe smirked. The system kept watch, but violations stacked. How did contraband slip through? What hold did the gang have on a man already facing the end? By January 2026, a documentary hit screens. Handsome Devil, the Wade Wilson story, dug into the case. It traced the killings, his face tattoos, the swastika hinting at twisted views. The film spotlighted his appeal, women flocking online, romanticizing the killer. Debates exploded. Critics called it glamorizing evil. A man with extremist ink and a history of violence drew admirers. Society faced the risk. Killers like Wilson, minds warped by hate and drugs, could inspire copycats. Loose in the world, they spread danger. Locked away, the threat lingered through fame. Why did his image pull such a crowd? Did the media feed the monster? Campaigns against the death penalty ramped up. Groups targeted Florida's 2023 law. 8 jurors enough for death, not 12. Unfair, they argued. Wilson's mental history got ignored. Disorders from teen years, meth grip. Could treatment have turned him? Petitions flooded in. Public split sharp. Some demanded justice for Melton and Ruiz. Families spoke of lost lives, kids without moms. Others doubted the trial's fairness. Tattoos swayed the jury, they said, motives muddled by drugs. The divide grew. Was death the only fix? The sentence raised hard questions. Did execution serve necessity? For some, yes, it ended the risk forever. A killer with deviant thoughts, unbound, endangered streets. Death demanded accountability. Victims' blood called for it. Public safety won out. But if carried through, justice reclaimed ground. Families found closure. Society drew a line. No mercy for the merciless. Yet doubts nagged. Life in prison could suffice, reformers said. Rehabilitation a shot. What tipped the scale? Did death truly heal the wounds? These threads weave on. Appeals loom. Last words wait. The rose shadows hold more. Final meals, final fights, and the clock ticking down. Cedric Allen Ricks. First, let's begin by looking at the central figure of this story, Cedric Allen Ricks. Who was he, and how did an ordinary man reach the point of committing a massacre inside his own home? I've gathered information from court records, trial testimony, and investigative reports, and what stands out is this. There were warning signs long before the violence exploded, but most of them were seen. Nearly all of them were ignored. In the gritty underbelly of Cook County, Illinois, Cedric Allen Ricks entered the world on September 8, 1974. Born into a working-class family amid the towering shadows of Chicago's skyline, Ricks was a black man who would grow to stand at 5'7" and weigh around 172 pounds, with piercing brown eyes and a mop of dark hair that often fell unkempt. But beneath that unassuming exterior lurked something darker, something his own father would later reveal in chilling courtroom testimony. During the 2014 trial, Rick's dad painted a portrait of a troubled kid from the start. Irritable, quick to rage, prone to smashing things in fits of fury or withdrawing into eerie isolation. He was always on edge, the father recounted, his voice echoing through the Tarrant County courtroom like a ghost from the past. These weren't just childish tantrums, they were early warning signs of a storm brewing deep within. Rick scraped by in school, making it only to the 12th grade before calling it quits. No diplomas, no steady jobs on record, just a nomadic existence drifting from state to state, chasing some elusive fresh start. Remarkably, for a man who'd later become synonymous with unimaginable brutality, Ricks had zero criminal record before 2013. No arrests, no brushes with the law. He was a blank slate, or so it seemed, until he landed in Texas, that vast expanse of opportunity and hidden dangers. There, in the suburbs of Bedford, his path crossed with Roxanne Diana Sanchez, a 30-year-old Hispanic woman whose life was already a tapestry of resilience and motherhood. It was around 2012-2013 when their worlds collided. Roxanne was no stranger to hardship. She had 2 young sons from a previous relationship, Marcus Figueroa, a bright-eyed 12-year-old full of energy, and Anthony Reyes Figueroa, his 8-year-old little brother, innocent and playful. They lived in a modest apartment, the kind where laughter could echo off the walls on good days. Ricks moved in, and soon enough they welcomed a child of their own, Isaiah, a bubbly 9-month-old bundle who completed what looked like a picture-perfect blended family. For a while it was bliss, or at least the illusion of it. Court records would later unveil a home video played during the trial, captured just 3 days before the nightmare unfolded. In it, Roxanne beams with that radiant smile, her dark hair framing a face full of hope. Ricks cradles baby Isaiah, his broad shoulders seeming protective rather than threatening. Marcus and Anthony dart around like typical kids giggling in roughhousing, oblivious to the fractures forming beneath the surface. But true crime stories thrive on the shadows behind the smiles, and this one was no exception. Dig deeper, and the cracks appear. Ricks carried a hidden history of violence against women, a pattern that emerged in damning trial testimony. Ex-girlfriends spoke of beatings, of controlling rages that left bruises and broken spirits. With Roxanne, the arguments started small but escalated like a gathering thunderhead. She'd push back against his volatility, fighting to maintain stability for her boys. Roxanne was the rock, the dedicated mom who worked tirelessly, juggling jobs and child care, pouring her energy into creating a safe haven for Marcus, Anthony, and little Isaiah. She dreamed of a better life, one where love didn't come with fists or fury. Ricks, meanwhile, wrestled with demons that went beyond mere temper. Experts called to the stand in 2014 dissected his psyche like a crime scene. One researcher, drawing from neurological studies, argued that Ricks's brain was wired for violence, a predisposition etched into his very gray matter, possibly from genetic factors or childhood traumas that scarred him invisibly. He wasn't just angry, he was a powder keg, primed by years of unresolved pain. By early May 2013, the tension hit a boiling point. Ricks decided to bail. He pawned some jewelry, Roxanne's perhaps, netting $700 to fund his escape from the apartment. It was the final straw, a betrayal that ignited the fuse. Roxanne confronted him, her voice likely laced with frustration and fear for her family's future. No one could have predicted how that simple spat would erupt into carnage, how a man with no prior convictions would shatter everything in a frenzy of steel and blood. But in the world of true crime, the calm before the storm is always the most deceptive, lulling victims and readers into a false sense of security before the horror strikes. Now we move into the core events of the case. Before we go any further, prepare yourself. What follows includes details that are disturbing and difficult to hear. This is where arguments turn into actions, and a normal apartment becomes a crime scene. From this point on, the story is no longer about background or warning signs. It is about what actually happened. On May 1, 2013, Roxanne Sanchez was in the midst of her routine, tending to her 2 older boys, Marcus and Anthony, while their baby brother Isaiah was safely tucked away with relatives. But tension hung in the air like a storm about to break. Cedric Ricks stormed through the door, his face twisted in frustration. He'd just pawned some jewelry for cash to fund his planned exit from the home, and Roxanne wasn't having it. Words flew like sparks, accusations of betrayal, demands for explanations. "Why would you do that?" she pressed, her voice edged with hurt and anger. Ricks felt cornered, controlled, his ego bruised. He shouted back, and she didn't back down. In true crime tales, it's often these mundane flashpoints that ignite into something monstrous, where a heated exchange crosses an invisible line into irreversible horror. In a blur of rage, Ricks bolted to the kitchen, his hands fumbling for the first weapon in reach, a standard butcher knife, its blade glinting under the fluorescent light, the kind every household has for slicing roasts or chopping vegetables. He wheeled back into the living room, eyes locked on Roxanne, who stood defiantly between him and the kids. The first strike was swift and savage, the knife plunging into her neck. Blood erupted in a warm spray, splattering the walls and soaking her shirt. Roxanne screamed, a guttural cry of shock and agony, her hands instinctively clutching the wound as crimson flowed between her fingers. "Cedric, stop," she begged, her words gurgling through the pain, but the plea fell on deaf ears. His fury had taken over, a red haze blotting out reason. He stabbed again and again into the soft flesh of her neck, the back of her head, her chest heaving with each thrust, her arms flailing in futile defense, her face contorted in terror. The room filled with the sickening sounds, the wet thud of metal meeting skin, her weakening gasps, the metallic tang of blood thickening the air. Roxanne crumpled to the floor, her body twitching in the final throes, a pool of red expanding beneath her like an accusatory stain. Little Anthony, just 8 years old and wide-eyed with innocence, froze for a split second before instinct kicked in. He rushed to his mother's side, tiny hands reaching out, tears streaming down his cheeks. "Mommy," he wailed, his voice piercing the chaos. But Rix, lost in his rampage, turned on the boy without hesitation. The knife flashed down, slicing into Anthony's tender neck, then his chest, blood blooming across his small frame. The child tried to scramble away, his sneakers slipping on the slick floor, but Rix pursued relentlessly. More stabs, deep, vicious wounds that tore through muscle and bone. Anthony's cries faded to whimpers as he collapsed beside Roxanne, his blood mingling with hers in a gruesome embrace. In the annals of true crime, these moments are the ones that haunt the vulnerability of a child, the betrayal by someone who should have been a protector, turning a home into a slaughterhouse in seconds. Marcus Figueroa, at 12, was old enough to grasp the nightmare unfolding before him. He didn't cower. Instead, he charged forward, a brave little warrior, desperate to shield his family. "Stop, Uncle Cedric!" he yelled, his voice cracking with fear and defiance as he grabbed at Rix's arm. But the man shoved him aside like a rag doll and unleashed hell. The first jab hit Marcus's raised hand, defensive wounds that would later tell the story of his fight. Then came the onslaught, stab after stab, 25 in total, raining down on his arms, neck, back, and chest. Blood poured from the gashes, soaking his clothes, the pain exploding like fire through his body. Marcus staggered, fell next to his mother and brother, his world narrowing to the throb of injuries and the metallic taste in his mouth. Yet, in that haze of suffering, survival instinct sparked. He went limp, eyes half closed, breath shallow and silent, playing dead amid the carnage. Rix, breathing heavily, hovered over him, delivering a few more probing stabs to ensure the job was done. The boy didn't flinch. Satisfied, Rix stepped back, surveying the devastation. Bodies sprawled in a tableau of death, the once cozy room now a blood-soaked horror show. For a fleeting moment, perhaps clarity pierced the fog. Rix stared at the scene, Roxanne motionless, her eyes vacant, Anthony still and silent, Marcus seemingly gone. No remorse surged through him then, no frantic call for help. Instead, he snatched Roxanne's car keys from the counter, wiped the knife haphazardly, and fled into the fading daylight. As he sped away toward Oklahoma, the weight of what he'd done began to settle. He picked up his phone and dialed family, his voice shaky but matter-of-fact. "I killed them." It wasn't a confession born of guilt. It was an admission, raw and unfiltered, the kind that echoes in true crime interrogations as the perpetrator's first crack in the facade. Back at the apartment, the silence was broken only by the drip of blood and the faint rasp of Marcus's controlled breathing. Investigators would later describe the crime scene as a butcher shop, walls streaked with arterial spray, floors slicked with congealing pools, furniture overturned in the struggle. Roxanne and Anthony had bled out from multiple lacerations, their vital arteries severed in the frenzy. Anthony's wounds were particularly heartbreaking, fatal gashes to the throat and torso that no child should endure. Marcus, enduring his vigil in the gore, waited until the engine roar faded. Then, summoning strength from some deep reserve, he crawled to the phone, his bloodied fingers dialing 911. "They've been stabbed, my mom and brother," he whispered, his voice faint but urgent. Paramedics arrived to a scene straight out of a slasher film, rushing the boy to the hospital where doctors marveled at his resilience. 25 wounds, yet none had hit the heart or major vessels. A miracle amid the madness. Physically, he would heal. Mentally, the scars ran deeper, a lifetime of trauma etched into his young soul. Years later at the trial, Marcus's testimony would be the linchpin, a chilling narrative delivered from the witness stand. "I saw him stab my mom first, then Anthony," he recounted, his eyes steady despite the quiver in his words. I tried to stop him, but he stabbed me too. I played dead so he'd leave. The courtroom hung on every syllable, jurors shifting uncomfortably as the boy relived the terror. In true crime fashion, such accounts humanize the horror, turning statistics into stories that demand justice. This wasn't random violence. It was the explosive culmination of domestic abuse. Experts dissected Rix's pattern, a history of battering women, controlling behaviors that simmered until they boiled over. With Roxanne, the argument over money and his impending departure lit the fuse on a long-fused bomb. Local papers like the Star-Telegram splashed the story across headlines, framing it as a stark warning about the hidden perils of intimate partner violence, how it escalates from slaps to stabs, claiming lives in the process. To summarize this section, we see a series of unusual and alarming behaviors from Cedric Allen Rix before, during, and after the attack. These actions raise critical questions. How did law enforcement respond once the violence occurred? How was he tracked, located, and taken into custody? And ultimately, did the system succeed in delivering justice? To answer those questions, we move to the next part of the story. Returning to the investigation itself, I collected information from the investigative phase and court proceedings, and what emerges is a complex picture. There are details about Cedric's mental state that are unexpected and legal decisions that remain controversial. This next section examines how investigators built their case, how the justice system responded, and what this case reveals about the intersection of psychology, violence, and the law. In the immediate aftermath, as the Bedford apartment still reeked of fresh blood, Tarrant County detectives sprang into action. Rix's frantic phone confession to family members became his fatal mistake. The call traced back through cell towers, pinpointing his location on the open road. Within hours, Oklahoma Highway Patrol pulled him over in Garvin County, his hands cuffed without resistance. No accomplices, no elaborate plan. This was a lone wolf's rampage, impulsive and raw. Extradited back to Texas under heavy guard, Rix faced the weight of capital murder charges, killing in the course of another felony, a ticket straight to the needle if convicted. But jail life hit hard first. Video footage from May 2013 leaked and splashed across local news like FX4 captured the brutal reality. Rix, freshly booked, emerged from a holding cell with his face a swollen mess. Two black eyes blooming like dark flowers, bruises modeling his skin from a savage inmate beatdown. Justice served early, some whispered online, but for Rix it was just the opening act in a decade-long descent. The trial unfolded in the sterile confines of Tarrant County's 371st District Court, presided over by Judge Molly Westfall, a no-nonsense jurist known for her steady hand in high-stakes cases. By mid-May 2014, the guilt phase wrapped up swiftly, the jury swayed by a parade of damning evidence. At its core was the heart-wrenching testimony of Marcus Figueroa, now 13, stepping onto the witness stand with the poise of someone far older, his voice trembling but resolute. He stabbed my mom first, then Anthony. The boy recounted, eyes locked on the jurors as he relived the nightmare. I tried to push him away, but he kept coming. Stabbed me 25 times. I played dead so he'd stop. The courtroom fell silent, save for muffled sobs. Some jurors wiped tears, the raw emotion cutting through the legalese like a knife. Prosecutors painted Rix as a monster, his solo act of terror irrefutable, backed by forensic blood spatter and that traced confession call. No room for doubt. The verdict came down. Guilty as charged. Then came the penalty phase on May 16, 2014, where the stakes skyrocketed. Rix, shackled and stoic, took the stand in a move that stunned even his own team. I want to die, he declared flatly, rejecting a plea deal for life without parole. I don't deserve to live. It's a chilling admission, the kind that true crime aficionados dissect for years. Was it remorse, manipulation, or genuine despair? Lead prosecutor Robert Hussman didn't buy the theatrics, labeling Rix a psychopath in closing arguments, hammering home his pattern of escalating violence against women. Exes testified to past assaults, building a timeline of abuse that made the jury's blood run cold. This marked Tarrant County's first death penalty push since 2012, a bold statement in a state where executions were as routine as rodeos. After 7 grueling hours of deliberation, the gavel fell. Death. Rix didn't flinch, just bowed his head, the room electric with tension as family members of the victims exhaled in quiet relief. Defense attorneys fought back with science, calling a Harvard-affiliated researcher from the Center for Law, Brain, and Behavior to the stand. The expert delved into Ricks's neurology, arguing his brain structure predisposed him to violence, abnormalities in impulse control regions, likely forged by childhood traumas. Ricks's father corroborated, spinning tales of a turbulent upbringing, explosive tantrums, isolation, early signs of a fractured mind. He was always wired different, the dad testified, voice cracking. It was a Hail Mary bid for mercy, painting Ricks not as evil incarnate, but a product of biology and bad luck. Yet, the jury remained unmoved. The brutality outweighed the brain scans, the pleas falling flat in the face of such carnage. By May 19, 2014, the transfer was official. Ricks shuffled into the infamous Polunsky Unit's death row, inmate number 99593, etched into his fate. Solitary cells, 23-hour lockdowns, the endless wait for appeals. The true crime grind of Texas justice had only just begun, a slow burn toward that lethal injection chamber. But in those early days, as Rick stared at cinder-block walls, the echoes of Marcus's testimony lingered, a ghost in the machine of his unraveling life. Behind the unforgiving walls of Polunsky Unit's death row, Ricks settled into a grinding existence of isolation. Locked in a cramped 6-by-9-foot cell for 23 hours a day, with just one fleeting hour outside for exercise or a cold shower. The appeals process became his lifeline, a labyrinthine battle against the inevitable. From 2014 to 2017, he mounted a direct appeal to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, only to see it dismantled on October 4, 2017. Undeterred, state habeas corpus petitions stretched from 2017 to 2020, but the CCA slammed the door shut. Federal relief proved equally elusive. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals rejected his claims on November 12, 2024. His final gambit, a petition for certiorari at the U.S. Supreme Court under docket 247038, met denial on October 6, 2025, exhausting every avenue and cementing his doom. By October 2025, Tarrant County's Judge Ryan Hill etched the end in stone. Lethal injection on March 11, 2026, in Huntsville's infamous chamber. News outlets pounced on October 22, framing the case as a stark cautionary tale of domestic terror. A December 13 update from state records locked it in. Ricks, one of 3 condemned souls, queued for 2026. As 2025 fades, Ricks stares down the barrel of oblivion. The true crime saga's grim coda. It begs the eternal question: does the needle deliver justice, or just another layer of vengeance? For grieving families, it's retribution. For opponents, a barbaric echo of the crime itself. The curtain falls, but the shadows of doubt endure. In the end, this true crime tale exposes the fragility of family bonds and the abyss of unchecked rage, leaving us to ponder: can execution mend the shattered lives of Roxanne, Anthony, and survivor Marcus? Or does it merely perpetuate the cycle of death? Justice, it seems, remains a haunting enigma. Roof.
On the events that unfolded that night, I've pieced together details from police reports and survivor accounts, plenty of chilling specifics that might make your skin crawl. On June 17, 2015, at around 4:45 p.m., Dylan Roof sat in his father's house in Columbia, South Carolina. He logged into his website, lastmeals.com, and started uploading photos. These weren't family snapshots or vacation memories. They showed Roof posing with Confederate flags, guns, and symbols of white supremacy. He had registered the site months earlier, but this update felt final, like tying up loose ends. What compelled him to document his hatred online just hours before stepping into the unknown? Was this a manifesto in images, meant for the world to see after the fact? The afternoon wore on. By 6:13 p.m., Roof's GPS pinged as he set a route from Columbia to Charleston. The drive covered about 120 miles, a straight shot down Interstate 26. He rode alone in his black Hyundai Elantra, the car loaded with ammunition and the Glock 45 caliber handgun he had bought 2 months prior. Traffic hummed around him, oblivious to the passenger carrying death in his trunk. Did Roof rehearse his plan during that hour and a half journey? Or was his mind blank, focused only on the destination ahead? The GPS trail later pieced together his path, but it couldn't reveal the thoughts racing through his head as the sun dipped low. Charleston came into view as evening settled. At approximately 8:16 p.m., Roof pulled up to the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church, known locally as Mother Emmanuel. This historic black church stood on Calhoun Street, its white walls and steeple a beacon in the humid summer night. Roof entered through a side door, slipping into the basement fellowship hall, where a Bible study group had gathered. 13 people sat around tables, discussing scripture from the book of Mark. The group included Reverend Clementus C. Pinckney, the church's pastor and a state senator, along with 8 other black parishioners and a few survivors-to-be. Roof took a seat among them, quiet and unassuming in his gray sweatshirt and jeans. For about 45 minutes, he listened as they prayed and shared verses. The room felt warm, welcoming, a stark contrast to the storm building inside him. Why did he sit there so long, absorbing the very community he despised? Was it to confirm his target, or did a flicker of doubt cross his mind in those final moments of peace? Then, at around 9:05 p.m., the calm shattered. Roof stood up during closing prayer. He pulled the Glock from his fanny pack and opened fire. Bullets tore through the air, striking the group at point-blank range. He shouted racial slurs as he reloaded 5 times, emptying 8 magazines, around 88 rounds in total. "You rape our women, and you're taking over our country," he yelled. "And you have to go." Reverend Pinckney fell first, followed by Cynthia Graham Hurd, Susie Jackson, Ethel Lance, Reverend DePayne Middleton, Dr. Tywanza Sanders, Reverend Daniel Simmons, Reverend Sharonda Coleman, Singleton, and Myra Thompson. Blood pooled on the floor amid scattered Bibles and chairs. 9 lay dead. Roof spared one woman, Polly Shepard, who hid under a table. He looked at her and said, "I'm not going to shoot you, because I want you to tell the story." What drove him to leave a witness alive, to ensure his message echoed beyond the walls? By 9:06 p.m., it was over. Roof walked out the same side door, got back in his Elantra, and drove into the night. Sirens wailed soon after, as calls flooded 911 lines from survivors dialing with trembling hands. The church basement turned into a crime scene in minutes. Bodies remained where they fell, surrounded by shell casings and the acrid smell of gunpowder. First responders arrived to a horrific tableau, prayers interrupted by violence, a sacred space desecrated. How could a 21-year-old from a quiet suburb orchestrate such targeted carnage? And what clues did he leave in his wake that might explain the hatred fueling it all? But this was only the beginning. In the coming sections, we'll uncover the manhunt that followed, the confessions that shocked investigators, and the lingering questions that still haunt this case. Mysteries about Roof's path to radicalization and the systemic failures that armed him. Diving back into what drove this case and the young man behind it, I've uncovered some deeply unsettling background info. Born on April 3, 1994, in Columbia, South Carolina, Roof entered the world in a middle-class family, the son of a carpenter father and a mother who worked in real estate. His parents divorced when he was young, and he bounced between homes, living mostly with his father and stepmother in a modest neighborhood. School records showed average grades at first, but by high school, cracks appeared. He repeated 9th grade twice and dropped out entirely around 2012, never finishing. What pushed a 18-year-old from textbooks to isolation? Friends later described him as withdrawn, spending hours alone in his room, the glow of a computer screen his main companion. That same year, 2012, Roof's online searches shifted. He read about the Trayvon Martin shooting, the Florida case where a black teenager died at the hands of a neighborhood watch volunteer. From there, his queries turned obsessive. Black on white crime. Typed into Google late at night. Results led him to the Council of Conservative Citizens website, a group promoting white nationalist views under the guise of heritage preservation. He clicked through articles claiming black violence against whites went unreported, statistics twisted to fuel resentment. Roof absorbed it all, his worldview hardening in the solitude of his bedroom. No one noticed the change at first. His family saw a quiet kid, not the radical forming inside. But why did a single news story ignite such a fire? Was it the echo chamber of the internet, or something deeper in his fractured home life that made him receptive? By December 27, 2014, Roof's thoughts turned to action. He climbed into his black Hyundai Elantra and drove from Columbia to Charleston, a 2-hour trip southeast. He parked near the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church on Calhoun Street, its historic brick facade standing since 1891 as a pillar for the black community. Roof walked the grounds, noting entrances and exits, then drove to Boone Hall Plantation in nearby Mount Pleasant, a former slave-holding site, now a tourist spot with oak-lined alleys. He snapped photos there before circling back to the church. His GPS logged the route, but it shut off for an hour during that return visit, time unaccounted for, perhaps spent scouting interiors or sketching plans in his mind. He returned home that evening, the day fading without incident. What details did he gather in that missing hour? Did he peer through windows, imagining the congregation inside? The visits continued. On February 24, 2015, Roof made the drive again, stopping at the Emmanuel AM Church. GPS went dark for 3 hours this time, a longer gap as he lingered in Charleston before heading back to Columbia. 3 days later, on February 27, 2015, he returned, weaving through the city. He visited the Angel Oak on Johns Island, a massive ancient tree sprawling like twisted arms, then Sullivan's Island and Fort Moultrie, historic spots tied to the Civil War and slavery's legacy. He grabbed food at a Chick-fil-A in Mount Pleasant, a mundane stop amid the reconnaissance, before looping back to the church. Each trip layered details: parking spots, traffic patterns, escape routes. Why these specific sites? Plantations and forts steeped in racial history. Were they fuel for his ideology, or just cover for the real target? Roof registered lastmeals on February 9, 2015, naming it after Rhodesia, the former white minority-ruled nation in Africa, a symbol for supremacists. He built the site quietly, uploading photos of himself with Confederate flags and burning American ones, alongside a manifesto railing against black people, Jews, and Hispanics. "I have no choice," he wrote in the text later discovered. "I am not in the position to, alone, go into the ghetto and fight." The words sat online, unseen by most, a digital confession waiting to surface. April brought more scouting. On April 25, 2015, another drive to Charlestown Church first, then Boone Hall for photos, Daniel Island next, and back to Emmanuel AME. GPS offline for 5 hours, his longest blackout yet. May 9, 2015 saw him at McLeod Plantation on James Island, camera in hand for website content, before detouring to the church. A week later, on May 16, 2015, he photographed Kensington Plantation in Eastover, then headed to Charleston, skirting the church area, hitting Sullivan's Island, and returning to the Emmanuel vicinity by 9:30 p.m. under cover of night. He drove home to Columbia afterward, the pattern clear, repeated exposure, building familiarity. 6 months before June 17, 2015, Roof had settled on a plan. He eyed the College of Charleston initially, a campus with young students, but switched targets. The college had tight security. Emmanuel AME offered history, a church founded by free blacks in 1816, site of civil rights meetings and vulnerability. No guards, open doors for Bible study. What made him pivot? The symbolism of striking a black sanctuary, or the ease of entry? Weapons came next. In March 2015, police arrested Roof in Lexington County for drug possession, Suboxone strips without a prescription. Clerks initially marked it a felony, which should have flagged him in the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, barring gun purchases. But an administrative error corrected it to a misdemeanor too late. The system glitched. In April 2015, Roof walked into a gun shop and bought a Glock 41, .45 caliber pistol, no questions asked. He loaded magazines in his room, practicing draws. How did a simple paperwork slip arm a man already on the edge? As the months ticked down, Roof's preparations sharpened. In the weeks leading up to June 17, 2015, he tested magazines for his Glock, loading them in the quiet of his father's house in Colombia. He drove the routes again in his mind, the GPS logs from his scouting trips now etched like maps. 5 hours offline at the church in April. Night returns in May. The manifesto sat ready on lastmeals. Calm. Words typed in isolation, claims of a coming war, hatred spelled out in plain sentences. He told a friend once about plans for something big, but brushed it off as talk. Family noticed his distance, the Confederate plates on his Elantra, but no one pressed. What final trigger pushed him from plans to the road that afternoon? The drive started simple, engine turning over, but it carried him straight to the church doors. Family glimpses showed isolation. Roof lived with his father, who bought him the car plates with Confederate symbols. A stepbrother noted his odd behavior, racist jokes, drug use. Psychiatric evaluations later mentioned autism spectrum traits, anxiety, depression, but Roof blocked their use in court. He inked Nazi symbols on his skin post-arrest, defiance in permanent ink. Overall, his foundation sets the stage, but deeper shadows await. In the sections ahead, we'll trace the investigation's twists, courtroom battles, and the unresolved mysteries of a mind unrepentant, forcing us to confront the echoes still rippling today. Moving on to what happened after the tragedy of June 17, 2015, let's take a look at the pursuit, capture, and the courtroom battles that followed. The hunt began at dawn on June 18, 2015. Roof drove north in his black Hyundai Elantra, the Glock, the .45 caliber still tucked away, as police across states scanned highways for the shooter from Charleston. Around 10:44 a.m., a routine traffic stop in Shelby, North Carolina, 245 miles from the bloodied church, ended it. Officers spotted the car matching alerts, pulled him over, and found the gun in the back seat. Roof surrendered without a fight, hands up as cuffs clicked shut. By afternoon, authorities flew him to the Sheriff Al Cannon Detention Center in North Charleston. He waived extradition, signing papers in a holding room under fluorescent lights. What thoughts crossed his mind during that quiet flight back? Regret or the satisfaction of a plan set in motion? The charges hit fast. On June 19, 2015, Roof stood in a South Carolina courtroom for his bond hearing. Prosecutors filed 9 counts of murder and 1 for weapons possession. Victims' families filled the benches, some speaking directly to him through a video feed. "I forgive you," one relative said, voice steady despite the grief. Others echoed the sentiment, their words hanging in the air like a challenge to his hatred. Governor Nikki Haley stepped in publicly, calling for the death penalty from her office in Colombia. Roof confessed to investigators that day, admitting he aimed to spark a race war. Why did he spill it all so soon? Detailing his motives without prompting. Did the family's forgiveness crack his resolve, or was it part of his twisted script? More accusations piled on. By July 7, 2015, federal prosecutors added 3 attempted murder charges and hate crime counts, 9 for using a firearm in murder, 24 for civil rights violations. On July 10, 2015, the FBI revealed their background check glitch that let Roof buy the gun, a report typed up in Washington offices amid growing scrutiny. A federal grand jury indicted him on hate crimes July 26, 2015, sealing the dual tracks of state and federal cases. Legal moves dragged through the summer. On July 31, 2015, Roof pleaded not guilty in federal court on his lawyer's advice, standing silent as the judge read the list. State prosecutors announced their death penalty pursuit September 3, 2015. Roof offered a guilty plea for life without parole September 16, 2015, but it went nowhere. The federal trial delayed to January 2016. On October 1, 2015, then pushed again December 1, 2015. Court appearances ramped up in 2016. February 11 saw Roof and friend Joey Meek charged with hiding the plot in federal court together. Jury selection for the federal case stalled multiple times from November 7 to 9, then 21, finally 28, 2016. On November 25, 2016, evaluators deemed Roof mentally competent after exams in a secure facility. He got permission to represent himself November 28, 2016, but rehired lawyers for the guilt phase December 4 and 5, 2016. The judge denied another delay December 6, 2016. Trial opened December 7, 2016, with witnesses recounting the basement horror. By December 15, 2016, the jury convicted him on all 33 federal counts. At sentencing January 4, 2017, Roof self-represented, showing no remorse. "I still feel like I had to do it." He claimed no mental issues. In state court April 10, 2017, he pleaded guilty to 9 murders. These steps locked in his fate, but shadows remain. In the sections to come, we'll uncover the sentencing hammer, life on death row, and the appeals that tease at unresolved enigmas, like the system's blind spots and a killer's unyielding silence. Until now, Dylan Roof sat isolated in his cell at the federal penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana. Guards watched him around the clock. Contact stayed minimal, no visitors beyond lawyers, medical checks limited. He waited for an execution date that never came. The routine dragged on, a far cry from the courtroom where it all locked in. Back on January 10, 2017, the federal jury in Charleston delivered the death sentence. Roof stood there face blank as the foreman read it out. 9 counts tied to the murders, each carrying the ultimate penalty. 3 months later, on April 10, 2017, the state court added 9 consecutive life sentences without parole, plus 95 years. No escape, even if federal appeals flipped. Appeals started in January 2020. Roof's lawyers argued his self-representation hid mental health evidence. By May 25, 2021, they filed a 321-page brief in the Fourth Circuit, citing autism spectrum disorder, anxiety, depression. The court rejected it August 25, 2021. They pushed for rehearing September 10, 2021, denied September 24, 2021, with government backing the sentence. Up to the Supreme Court March 2, 2022, refused October 11, 2022. On December 23, 2024, President Biden commuted 37 federal death sentences to life. Roof got left out, hate crimes and terrorism excluded him. Lawyers tried again April 21, 2025, claiming counsel errors and bias. The Fourth Circuit denied rehearing August 14, 2025, evidence lacking. June 17, 2025, marked 10 years since the shooting. Memorials honored the Emanuel 9, sparking debates on racism, gun checks, death penalty humanity. Roof's mental issues fueled arguments. Some said execution fit hate crimes, others pushed life.
Krista Gale Pike. Before we examine the details of the crime committed by Krista Pike, we need to step back and look at who she was and the environment that shaped her. Understanding what led up to this case is critical. I've reviewed court records, witness statements, and investigative reports, and what stands out is how many warning signs were present long before the murder ever occurred. Picture this. It's the mid-1990s in America, a time when grunge music blared from radios and the country was buzzing with economic optimism, but beneath the surface, programs like Job Corps were scrambling to save troubled teens from broken homes. These weren't your typical high schools. They were havens for dropouts, kids with histories of violence, drug abuse, and family chaos, where supervision was loose, especially after dark, and romantic dramas simmered like a pot ready to boil over. In Knoxville, Tennessee, near the sprawling University of Tennessee campus, that's exactly where the nightmare began on January 12, 1995. What started as an afternoon ploy escalated into a brutal evening of terror stretching into the night, with the violence itself unfolding in a relentless 30-minute frenzy that would shock even seasoned investigators. The scene was a forsaken industrial mill, shrouded by dense woods on the outskirts of town, a perfect hideaway for secrets, far from prying eyes. This wasn't some random spot. It was chosen deliberately, just a stone's throw from the Job Corps dorms, where the players in this tragedy lived, schemed, and later tried to act normal. Krista Pike, the 18-year-old at the center of it all, had already built a reputation in that chaotic environment. Fellow students whispered about her obsession with the occult, how she'd rant about Satan not as a religion, but as a tool for power, a way to intimidate and control. "She's not right," one classmate later testified, recalling Pike's threats. "I'd hear her say things like, 'That bitch is going to disappear if she doesn't back off.'" Pike wasn't some clueless kid. She had an above-average IQ, fully aware of her actions' consequences, yet she thrived on the fear she instilled. Born in 1976 in West Virginia, Pike's life was a blueprint for disaster. Divorced parents, neglect, alleged sexual abuse, though contested in court, and the devastating loss of her grandmother at age 12, which triggered self-harm and a deep-seated rage. "I felt like a monster from a young age," Pike confessed in court records, "and Satan was my only friend." This wasn't devout Satanism. It was a crutch for her antisocial tendencies, a mask for her manipulative streak and thirst for dominance. Enter Colleen Slummer, a 19-year-old classmate who posed no real threat, no history of violence, no schemes to steal Pike's boyfriend. But in Pike's paranoid mind, twisted by abandonment fears, Colleen became the enemy. Slimmer trusted the invitation to smoke weed and make peace in the woods, walking into a trap with no defenses, believing it was just girls sorting out drama. The shock hits hardest in the details. At just 18, barely an adult, Pike orchestrated a group assault that involved savage beatings, slashing skin with sharp objects, carving a pentagram, a satanic symbol, into Slimmer's chest and forehead, and finally crushing her skull with a chunk of concrete. Pike even kept a shard of the skull as a trophy, a chilling sign of her need for control and post-kill thrill. This wasn't solo madness. Accomplices played roles, turning jealousy into collective horror. Red flags waved everywhere. Pike's prior threats went unreported. The Job Corps system turned a blind eye to her escalating weirdness. If only someone had intervened. But as the sun set that fateful day, Pike's simmering grudge crystallized into a deadly plan. What twisted impulse would drive her to lure an innocent girl into the darkness? The bloodbath was just hours away. Now that we've established the background, we move into the next section, where we examine the crime itself in detail. Prepare yourself. What happened next is deeply disturbing and difficult to reconcile with the fact that those involved were barely 18 years old. For the whole incident, on January 12, 1995, in Knoxville, Tennessee, Krista Pike convinced her 17-year-old boyfriend, Daryl Shipp, and their friend, Shadola Peterson, to join her in confronting Colleen Slimmer, a 19-year-old classmate Pike delusionally believed was trying to steal Shipp away. "We're just going to talk it out, smoke some weed, and make peace," Pike allegedly cooed to Slimmer in the dorms, her voice laced with false sweetness, drawing the trusting girl into the trap. Slimmer, with no history of aggression and no inkling of the betrayal ahead, agreed without hesitation. She didn't arm herself, didn't suspect a thing. This wasn't random. It was premeditated deception, the first thread in a web of cruelty. The group set out as dusk fell, walking casually through the dense woods flanking the University of Tennessee campus, their footsteps crunching on frozen leaves like an ominous countdown. The destination, an abandoned industrial mill, isolated and shrouded in shadows, chosen for its seclusion, no witnesses, no escape routes. "Come on, it's just up here," Pike urged, her tone shifting from friendly to commanding as they ventured deeper into the gloom. The site was perfect for Pike's twisted vision, remote enough to muffle screams, dark enough to amplify terror. Slimmer, still oblivious, chatted lightly, perhaps hoping to mend whatever imaginary rift existed. But as they arrived at the derelict structure, the facade crumbled. There was no weed, no reconciliation, only violence erupting almost immediately. A brutal ambush that caught Slimmer off guard. Pike struck first, her fists flying in a frenzy of punches and kicks, overwhelming Slimmer, who crumpled to the ground, dazed and defenseless. Shipp and Peterson didn't intervene. Instead, they piled on, turning the assault into a group frenzy. "You think you can take him from me?" Pike snarled, her words echoing in the cold air as recounted in Peterson's later testimony. The initial beating was savage, blows to the face, stomach, and back, but it was just the prelude. What followed was 30 minutes of pure torture, a deliberate prolongation designed not for quick death, but for humiliation and control. Pike grabbed a sharp object, a box cutter or a shard of glass, details vary in accounts, and began slashing Slimmer's skin, carving deep gashes across her arms and torso. Then came the ritualistic horror. Pike etched a pentagram, the five-pointed star symbolizing her satanic fascinations, into Slimmer's chest and forehead, the lines deliberate and deep, blood welling up like ink on a demonic canvas. This wasn't mere rage. It was a performance of power, Pike reveling in the symbolism as if drawing strength from the occult. Through it all, Slimmer's pleas pierced the night. "Please stop. We're friends. Why are you doing this?" she sobbed, her voice breaking as she curled into a fetal position, tears mixing with blood. She begged for mercy, calling out their names, but her cries only seemed to fuel Pike's sadism. No effective resistance came. Slimmer was outnumbered, unarmed, and in shock, fully aware of her impending doom, which amplified the crime's barbarity in the eyes of investigators later. Finally, as Slimmer lay weakened and gasping, Pike spotted a chunk of asphalt or concrete nearby. With chilling resolve, she hoisted it high and smashed it down repeatedly on Slimmer's head, the impacts cracking bone with sickening thuds until the skull shattered, life extinguishing in a pool of gore. Death was instantaneous at that point, but Pike wasn't done. Even in the aftermath, Pike's detachment was eerie. She knelt beside the body, pried loose a fragment of skull, a macabre trophy, and pocketed it. A rare behavior psychologist linked to antisocial personality disorder and a killer's need for souvenirs to relive the thrill. Ship and Peterson watched in silence, complicit to the end. The group then simply walked away, leaving Slimmer's mutilated remains in the dirt. No calls for help, no remorse evident. Pike, according to witnesses who saw her later, appeared calm, even smug, as if the act had empowered her. Legally, this was first-degree murder with aggravating factors, premeditation, torture, and ritual elements that screamed intent and depravity, laying the groundwork for prosecutors to demand the ultimate penalty. But in those first hours after the bloodbath, Pike believed she'd gotten away with it, the body hidden, the secret shared only among the guilty. Little did she know, her arrogance would unravel everything. How long could such a gruesome truth stay buried? The hunt was about to begin. Based on everything we've examined so far, it becomes clear that Pike's actions were not spontaneous or accidental. They were deliberate, sustained, and driven by a need for control. In the next section, we'll look at what happened after the murder, how law enforcement responded, and whether the system moved quickly enough to deliver justice. In the pre-dawn hours of January 13, 1995, as Knoxville slept under a blanket of winter chill, Krista Pike returned to her Job Corps dorm with a secret that burned too hot to contain. She didn't bury the evidence or whisper it to the shadows. No, Pike's fatal flaw was her ego. High on the adrenaline of the kill, she started boasting almost immediately, cornering fellow students into dimly lit halls and common areas. "I just killed a girl," she'd say with a twisted grin, her voice carrying that eerie mix of pride and detachment, as later recounted by witnesses. But words weren't enough. Pike pulled out the grisly proof, a shard of human skull, still flecked with blood and tissue, waving it like a trophy from some macabre game. "See this? It's from her head," she bragged to one horrified classmate, then another, repeating the story with chilling consistency, as if reliving the thrill made it more real. This wasn't a one-off slip. Pike's compulsion to flaunt her deed turned whispers into a chorus, and soon enough, a tipster among the students alerted Job Corps staff, who wasted no time relaying the bombshell to the Knoxville Police Department. The KPD sprang into action that same day, treating the report not as idle gossip, but as a credible lead on a potential homicide. Detectives knew the Job Corps crowd, a melting pot of troubled teens with loose supervision where threats and drama were commonplace, but this smelled different, too specific, too grotesque. They started with the basics, interviewing the tipsters who described Pike's boasts in vivid detail, including her mentions of a fight in the woods near the University of Tennessee. No body had been reported missing yet, but the skull fragment screamed foul play. Armed with verbal sketches of the scene, an abandoned mill in the forested outskirts, search teams fanned out, combing the area on foot in the fading light. It wasn't high-tech wizardry. No cameras or GPS tracked the killer's path. Instead, it was old-school legwork, guided by the suspect's own loose lips and the terrain's familiarity to the group. By evening, they found it. Colleen Slimmer's battered body sprawled in the dirt amid the ruins, her face unrecognizable from the pummeling, her chest and forehead etched with that damning pentagram, and her skull caved in like a shattered eggshell. Forensics would later confirm the nightmare. The bulk of the cuts and carvings happened while she was alive, non-fatal wounds meant to prolong the agony, with the concrete blows as the merciless finale. This wasn't an accident or a quick scuffle. It was deliberate, ritualistic cruelty, elevating the case to especially heinous in legal terms, the kind that screams for maximum punishment. With the body secured, the net tightened. Pike was hauled in for questioning on January 14, just 36 hours after the murder, a blistering pace driven by her self-sabotage. She didn't lawyer up right away, another rookie mistake born of overconfidence. Sitting across from detectives in a stark interrogation room, Pike stayed eerily calm, no tears, no panic. "We were just going to scare her," she claimed coolly, admitting her presence but downplaying the savagery. Things got out of hand. But the details didn't add up. The torture's duration, the pentagram's precision, the lack of defensive wounds on Slemmer painted a picture of calculated sadism, not chaos. Investigators seized the skull fragment from Pike's possessions, a direct DNA link that shredded any denial. They separated her from Shipp and Peterson, grilling them individually to cross-check stories. Shipp clammed up at first, but Peterson cracked under pressure, her account aligning with the forensics, the luring, the slashes, the carving, the fatal blows, all with Pike as the ringleader. Peterson's willingness to cooperate sealed her fate as a state's witness, while Shipp and Pike faced the full brunt. Arrests came swift that day, first-degree murder charges with aggravating factors for the torture and ritual elements, no bail for Pike, her file rocketing to state prosecutors. Local media pounced, headlines screaming about the satanic teen killer in Knoxville, a female perp barely out of high school, amplifying public outrage and piling pressure on the DA to go hard. Job Corps came under fire too, whispers of ignored red flags, Pike's prior threats, her rants about murder, highlighting a system that failed to intervene. Slemmer's family, notified only after the arrests, reeled in horror, their grief compounded by the refusal to return the skull shard for burial. It was core evidence, locked away. "We just want to lay her whole." Her mother pleaded in interviews, her voice breaking, fueling demands for justice. But as Pike sat in a cell, the real trial loomed. Would her composure hold in court, or would the weight of her boasts bury her? By March 1996, the Knoxville courthouse buzzed with tension, a media frenzy swirling around one of Tennessee's most gruesome cases. The trial unfolded in the state criminal court, drawing crowds and reporters eager for every lurid detail of the 1995 slaying, a story of teen jealousy twisted into satanic horror that captivated and repulsed the public. Krista Pike, the 18-year-old ringleader, stood as the main defendant. Her trial bifurcated into two phases under Tennessee law. First, guilt, then sentencing. Ted Earl Shipp, her boyfriend, faced his own proceedings as an adult, while Shadola Peterson cut a deal, turning state's witness for probation. Colleen Slemmer's family sat stone-faced in the gallery, their presence a silent accusation amid the flashbulbs. Prosecutors painted Pike as a cold architect of evil, hammering home the premeditated savagery. "This is one of the most barbaric acts I've ever seen," the lead attorney thundered, detailing the 30-minute torture, the beatings, the slashes, the pentagram carved into Slemmer's living flesh as a ritualistic flourish, and Pike's crowning depravity, snapping off a skull fragment as a souvenir. They argued it wasn't just murder, but first-degree slaughter with aggravating factors, emphasizing Pike's pauses to savor Slemmer's agony, her post-kill boasts as evidence of enjoyment and zero remorse. Forensics backed it up. Autopsy reports showed most wounds inflicted while Slemmer was conscious, her pleas ignored in a display of power Pike seemed to relish. Peterson's testimony was damning. She described Pike directing the assault with a laugh, ordering the pentagram as if scripting a demonic play. Job Corps witnesses piled on, recounting Pike's gleeful show and tell with the bone shard, turning her arrogance into ironclad proof. Defense attorneys fought back, humanizing Pike as a product of hellish trauma, divorced parents, neglect, alleged abuse, and the grandmother's death that shattered her at 12, sparking self-harm and a descent into occult fantasies. They paraded family and experts, arguing her high IQ masked deep psychological scars, pushing for diminished capacity or life without parole. "She's a victim too," one lawyer pleaded, but the jury wasn't swayed. The evaluation showed Pike knew right from wrong, her manipulation of accomplices proving calculated intent. Pike herself sat impassive, no apologies, no tears, her blank stare fueling the prosecution's narrative of an unrepentant evil girl, as headlines dubbed her. the satanic angle exploded in the press, amplifying calls for justice amid public outrage. Guilt came swift in Phase 1. Phase 2 sealed her fate. Jurors, unmoved by mitigators like her youth or background, found the torture especially heinous, voting death by electric chair, plus 25 years for conspiracy. Shipp got life. Peterson walked free. Slemmer's mother spoke through sobs. "You've taken everything from us," her words tipping the emotional scale toward maximum penalty. No hung jury, no delays. The verdict was unanimous and quick, a precedent for Tennessee's death row. But as Pike was led away in chains, the real marathon began. Automatic appeals that would drag on for decades. Would her past ever earn mercy, or was this monster beyond redemption? Next, we turn to the moment that ultimately changed everything. The legal turning point that finally determined her fate after years of delays, appeals, and unanswered questions within the justice system. The gavel's echo in that 1996 Knoxville courtroom marked not an end, but the beginning of Krista Pike's long, shadowy limbo on death row. A sentence of electric chair plus 25 years for conspiracy that Tennessee law mandated be followed by automatic appeals, stalling any swift justice. Transferred to the Deborah K. Johnson Rehabilitation Center in Nashville, Pike entered a world of ironclad isolation, her days confined to a solitary cell for 23 hours at a stretch, with minimal human contact beyond the clank of meal trays and the watchful eyes of guards. This wasn't just punishment. It was a psychological siege. Every letter she penned, often lengthy rants justifying her past or blaming her fractured childhood, scrutinized and filed away, revealing no direct apologies to Slemmer's family, only a persistent pattern of deflection. Those early years behind bars didn't break her spirit. If anything, they honed her edge, turning the young killer into a caged predator who viewed the system as another arena for control. Pike's volatility erupted in 2001, shattering any illusion of reform. In a fit of rage, during a rare moment of shared space, she targeted fellow inmate Patricia Jones, looping a shoelace around her neck and squeezing with lethal intent. Jones gasped for air, teetering on the brink of death until intervention saved her. Pike's casual dismissal? "I just wanted her to shut up," she reportedly sneered in her statement, a chilling echo of her lack of empathy that earned her an additional 25-year sentence for attempted murder. Prosecutors seized on it as proof positive. This wasn't a rehabilitated soul, but a high-risk offender whose violence simmered undiminished, even in chains. The incident wasn't isolated. Pike racked up a string of lesser infractions, defying orders, stirring tensions with cellmates, playing the victim card when disciplined, claiming unfair treatment without evidence. Internal probes dismissed her complaints, painting a portrait of a woman who manipulated from the shadows, her above-average IQ weaponized not for growth, but for survival games within the prison walls. By 2012, Pike's cunning escalated into outright conspiracy. She wove a web of emotional entanglement with guard Justin Heflin and acquaintance Donald Cohat, exploiting flirtations and promises to plot an escape. Whispers of smuggled tools and coordinated breaks leaked out, but the scheme crumbled under scrutiny. Heflin fired, Cohat slapped with 7 years. Pike hit with internal sanctions that further blackened her record. This wasn't mere boredom. It was a testament to her enduring antisocial traits, a refusal to surrender control even after decades. Those years on death row didn't mellow Pike. They just gave her more time to refine her manipulative prowess, shifting from outright rebellion to a calculated facade of calm, spinning tales of trauma for appeal hearings, while her core remained untouched by remorse. Unlike many death row inmates who crumbled into depression or madness, Pike held firm, her psyche resilient in its darkness, making her a case study in criminology circles for female killers and trophy-taking behaviors, though she never cooperated with researchers. Appeals dragged on relentlessly, Pike's lawyers hammering her youth at the time of the crime, just 18, her alleged childhood abuse and mental health woes as grounds for mercy. Courts rebuffed them time and again, citing her clear awareness and the crime's premeditation. In a bizarre 2001 twist, Pike petitioned to drop her appeals, craving a quicker end, only to retract it later, her flip-flop branded as impulsive instability rather than genuine contrition. These prison escapades, the assault, the plot, were weaponized against her in every review, cited as continuing dangerousness that torpedoed clemency bids. proving she posed an unrelenting threat if ever freed. No real rehabilitation programs stuck. Her files screamed "not reformed," a damning label in a system wary of second chances for the irredeemable. As 2025 waned, Pike lingered in that Nashville fortress, her options dwindling, the appeals exhausted. Her prison saga wasn't just waiting for death. It was the slow reveal of a monster unbowed, her actions behind bars sealing her fate more than the original sin. But with the electric chair's shadow looming for 2026, could one final plea sway the scales, or was this the inexorable march to execution? Nearly 3 decades after her 1996 conviction for the ritualistic slaughter of Colleen Slemmer, a first-degree murder laced with aggravating horrors like prolonged torture, pentagram carvings, and that macabre skull trophy, Krista Pike remained Tennessee's sole female death row inmate. Her sentence a cocktail of capital punishment plus stacked prison terms for later crimes. Appeals had churned relentlessly since the gavel fell, her lawyers volleying arguments about her tender age of 18 at the time of the killing, a childhood riddled with alleged abuse and neglect, and mental health fractures that supposedly clouded her judgment. Courts swatted them down repeatedly, deeming Pike fully cognizant, her high IQ and orchestration of accomplices proof of cold calculation rather than youthful impulse. In a surreal 2001 pivot, Pike even begged to waive further fights, craving a swift end, only to retract it, a flip-flop judges branded as erratic inconsistency, not redemption. These battles stretched her death row stint to an agonizing 30 years, a limbo critics decry as death row phenomenon, psychological torment beyond the sentence, where endless waits erode the soul, though courts countered that Pike's own appeals fueled the delay. The endgame crystallized on September 30, 2025, when the Tennessee Supreme Court issued its order scheduling Pike's execution for exactly 1 year later, September 30, 2026. This decree slammed the door on her marathon of legal lifelines, thrusting the case into enforcement mode. The method? Electric chair, a relic of Tennessee's penal past, sparking fresh debates on its brutality, searing pain versus humane alternatives, though it held firm as constitutional. In their final assessments, judges underscored Pike's unyielding danger. Prison assaults, escape plots, and a litany of infractions painted her as unreformed, her brain's supposed immaturity at 18 irrelevant against evidence of premeditated sadism and ongoing menace. If carried out, Pike's death would etch history, the first woman executed in Tennessee in over 2 centuries, and among the youngest in America's post-1976 death penalty era. It sets a stark precedent, reinforcing hardline stances on especially heinous crimes where torture and lack of remorse trump mitigators like trauma. Public discourse rages, personal accountability versus childhood scars, deterrence versus vengeance, the ethics of frying a brain that neuroscience says wasn't fully wired at the crime's cusp. Academics dissect it as a textbook on female teen killers, trophy-taking psyches, and continuing dangerousness, her prison antics dooming any clemency. Pike's legacy? A grim mirror to justice's paradoxes, a system that dangles death but delivers decades of dread, failing to heal victims' kin or prevent the rot of unchecked youth rage. Slemmer's family finds legal closure, yet no resurrection. Society grapples with warnings ignored, from Job Corps oversights to abuse's scars. 30 years on death row begs the unanswered. Is justice in the kill or in the endless wait for it? As 2026 looms, Pike's story endures, a chilling emblem of extremity and systemic snags. That brings today's video to an end. If you found this video relevant or valuable, please like and share it so others can watch as well. Give your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe for future videos. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.